The sea whispered freedom, but destiny had other plans. I thought my cabin was mine alone. Until I turned, and the stranger standing there was not just a man but the billionaire owner of the entire ship, hiding a secret that could change everything. If you love luxury romance stories, don't just watch. Subscribe now and join our family. Tell me in the comments, from which country are you watching this story? I'd love to know. I boarded the ship, telling myself this was only a voyage and not an escape. Yet the ocean kept breathing like a living thing beneath the hull, a steady whisper that promised distance from everything I couldn't fix on land. And as the gangway lifted, I felt the world behind me shrink to a point of light, the kind you see when you close your eyes after crying, small and stubborn and impossible to ignore, while the brass rails, the polished teak, and the faint scent of salt and citrus wrapped around me, like the beginning of a spell I hadn't meant to cast. The corridors were hushed in that luxurious way that makes every footstep sound like a secret. Soft carpet swallowing noise, while my suitcase wheels murmured along the runner and door numbers slid past like mile markers on a road at night. And with each turn I rehearsed the quiet life I wanted for the next 10 days. Early breakfasts alone, long afternoons reading on the deck. A sun hat pulled low, no questions and no history, just the sea drawing a straight line between what hurt and what might finally stop hurting. My cabin door waited at the end of a short hall, where a porthole spilled a slice of glittering water across the floor. And when I fitted the keycard, the lock gave a gentle click that sounded almost polite, as if the ship were bowing me into a sanctuary, a private box in a theater before the curtains rise. I pushed the door with the heel of my hand, and a strand of hair blew across my cheek from the conditioned breeze, that hotel cool air expensive places always have. And for an instant I believed in a simple miracle, that the room inside would be empty, obedient mine. The first impression was light and symmetry. Cream walls and a low hum from hidden vents, a bed perfectly made with the kind of crisp corners that refused to remember the people who slept there before you. A silver tray with 2 glasses, and a folded note I assumed was a welcome. And all of it made sense until it didn't, because there was a shadow where a shadow should not be. Not cast by furniture or luggage, but by presence, a stillness with gravity, the kind the body detects before the mind allows it. And something inside my chest braced without my permission. I turned, not fast, not slow, the way you turn when you're trying to prove to yourself that you are not afraid. And my gaze found him the way a compass finds north, inevitable and exact. A man standing in the spill of porthole light, with one hand loosely in his pocket, and the other resting against the frame as though he had been waiting for the right moment to exist. His suit was a study in understatement, blue as deep water, his shirt open at the throat, and there was a quietness to him that suggested authority so complete it didn't need to speak to be believed. He apologized first in a voice meant for close distances, low and even, a voice that didn't ask permission to enter a room because it never needed to. And while he said the words that explain everything, wrong cabin, misunderstanding, I can step out. I noticed details that explained nothing at all. The watch that was not merely expensive but rare, the calm of a man who never rushes because time arranges itself around him, and the way his eyes lingered a fraction longer than courtesy requires, not hungry, not cold, but assessing, as if he were measuring the truth I had brought in with my suitcase. I should have asked him to leave. I should have laughed and made this moment small, but the ship gave a subtle shiver beneath our feet, that first flirtation with open water, and in the tremor I felt something shift that was not mechanical, a hinge inside the day loosening, and he stepped forward just enough for the porthole light to cut a clean line across his features, revealing the kind of face you recognize from articles you pretend you don't read. And before he offered his name, I already knew it, because men who carry rooms like weather are rarely strangers for long. And the secret he was hiding was not that he belonged on this ship, but that the ship belonged to him. He did not rush to leave, though courtesy demanded it, and that refusal alone was its own declaration of power. He stood where the light from the porthole shaped his figure in quiet authority, and I realized that this man was not uncertain, not embarrassed, not the kind of guest who stumbles into the wrong room and laughs it off. His presence had weight, as if the ship itself recognized him. In that pause, in that measured stillness, my breath grew loud inside me, clumsy against the elegance of his silence. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a calm resonance that settled in the room like velvet. He said my name without asking, shaping the syllables as though he had rehearsed them. The shock of hearing it, my private name on the lips of a stranger, stole the air from me. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tighter, suddenly aware of how small I looked against the grandeur of the cabin and the composure of the man before me. He was not simply trespassing. He was unveiling something I had not agreed to share. I demanded to know how he could possibly know me, my voice sharper than intended, though trembling beneath its edge. He did not flinch nor apologize, only lifted his gaze with a quiet assurance that seemed to ask why I thought anonymity was ever mine to hold. His eyes studied me as if I were a puzzle already solved, as if I had stepped into a play whose script he had written long before I arrived. That certainty was more disarming than any confession could have been. He introduced himself then, not as a stranger, not even as a man explaining a mistake, but with the deliberate gravity of someone revealing a truth that changes the air. His name was already familiar to me from newspapers I pretended not to read, from headlines about acquisitions and fortunes that seemed untouchable. To hear it spoken inside this cabin, to connect the myth to the man who stood so close, was to feel the line between fantasy and reality dissolve in one swift motion. I tried to laugh, tried to dismiss it as though it were absurd to find the billionaire owner of the ship standing in my private room. But my attempt fell flat, swallowed by the sharp awareness that he had not come here by accident. He watched me with the intensity of someone who knew his secret was already slipping into the open, and that whether I wanted it or not, I was now part of it. I felt the deck beneath us vibrate with the engine's pulse, as if the ship itself carried our tension forward. He stepped closer, not enough to invade, but enough to erase the safe margin between strangers. In that single movement, the cabin shrank, the walls pressed in, and I could taste the electricity of something dangerous and unspoken. He asked if I believed in coincidences, his voice laced with a question that was not really a question at all. I answered with silence, because the truth was written in the tremor of my pulse, in the way my breath refused to steady. The moment stretched, a fragile thread between defiance and surrender, and I realized this encounter was not an interruption of my journey, it was the journey itself. His presence rewrote the map of my escape, replacing solitude with something unpredictable, magnetic and entirely beyond my control. And as his gaze held mine, I understood that secrets were not meant to remain hidden on a ship where the ocean carried every whisper into the horizon. He did not move quickly to explain himself, and that hesitation was more dangerous than any admission because it meant he was measuring me, testing whether I would demand the truth or wait for him to give it. The silence was thick, charged, and in that quiet I felt the strange certainty that every detail had purpose. The way his hand brushed the edge of the desk, the way his eyes wandered across the cabin as if it belonged to him, the unshakable calm of a man too accustomed to control to ever appear cornered. When he finally spoke, it was not with apology but with a confession that was not fully a confession, a fragment of something larger. He said the cabin was not chosen by chance, that the manifest had been arranged, that my name had not slipped into this place by accident. The words were soft, but they stripped the air from my lungs because they meant I was not hidden, I was not anonymous, I was known, and worse, I was expected. My escape had been anticipated before it had even begun. I asked him why, demanded the reason with the edge of panic barely disguised, but his answer was a smile that was not cruel yet, not merciful, a curve of his mouth that carried the weight of secrets too large for the narrow walls of that room. He told me that not everything needed to be revealed at once, that the ocean carried truths better than voices ever could, and that some answers arrived only when you were brave enough to stay long enough to hear them. His refusal to explain was its own explanation. This was not chance, it was design. The cabin felt smaller then, not because of its size, but because every corner seemed to lean toward him, toward the inevitability of his presence. My suitcase on the floor looked foolish, like a child's attempt at escape, fragile against the magnitude of a man who owned not only this ship, but the silence within it. I wanted to tell him to leave, to reclaim the illusion of privacy, but my voice betrayed me, carrying only questions I was not ready to know the answers to. And he listened, patient, as if my fear were part of a game already set in motion. He stepped to the window, gazing at the horizon where the sea folded itself endlessly. And he said that freedom was never free, that solitude always carried a price. and that perhaps my presence here was part of a debt neither of us had chosen. His words were layered, designed to confuse, yet beneath them I heard the unmistakable tone of possession, as if he were not speaking of the ship, not of the sea, but of me. The realization burned, frightening and magnetic all at once. I pressed him again, this time more forcefully, and he turned back with eyes that softened but did not surrender. He said only that there were dangers aboard, dangers that could not be seen by passengers sipping champagne on the deck, and that I had stepped into the middle of them the moment I boarded. He promised that keeping me close was the only way to shield me, and though the words were meant to protect, I felt the weight of chains in every syllable, invisible and tightening. The ship rocked gently, a cradle against the vastness of the sea. But inside me there was no calm, only the sharp understanding that this voyage was no longer mine. He had set the stage and I had walked onto it, unaware of the role written for me. His secret hovered between us, unspoken but undeniable, and I knew that whatever truth he was hiding would not stay buried for long. The ocean could hold whispers, but it could not keep them forever. The following morning, sunlight poured across the deck in a wide golden sweep, and I told myself I would avoid him, that the ocean was vast enough to keep us strangers if I chose it to be. I carried a book I had no intention of reading and settled near the railing, breathing salt air like medicine, pretending the night before had been a dream written by exhaustion. But even in that illusion, a thread pulled tight, reminding me that the man who unsettled me was not just a shadow. He was the billionaire whose presence could bend the very air around him. I sensed him before I saw him, the way one senses an oncoming storm, not from sound or sight, but from the pressure in the sky. He walked across the deck with the ease of someone who belonged not only to the ship, but to the horizon itself, and every conversation paused a heartbeat as he passed. He did not come directly to me at first, but the knowledge that he was there hollowed my attempt at solitude. The ocean stretched endlessly, yet I had never felt more cornered. When he finally approached, he did not ask permission, he simply sat, as if the space beside me had been reserved from the moment I stepped aboard. His silence was deliberate, and I hated how my pulse betrayed me, thudding against my ribs as though my own body recognized him before my mind allowed it. I asked why he persisted, why he could not let me vanish into the anonymity I had paid for, and he only tilted his head, the corner of his mouth hinting at amusement that was not cruel, but unnervingly certain. He said I misunderstood, that anonymity was a luxury no one truly owned, that the moment you stepped into a world built on wealth and power, you were seen, catalogued, remembered. He said my name again, softly, as if testing how it felt against the roar of the waves. I shivered, because there was no map in which he should have found me, no chance encounter that explained his knowledge. Yet here he was, patient, composed, watching the panic ripple beneath my defiance. I told him I did not believe in fate, that coincidences were only accidents dressed up to feel important. He leaned closer then, his voice low enough that it threaded through the sound of the sea without disturbing it. He said fate had nothing to do with this, that the cabin I occupied had been chosen for me long before I booked the ticket, and that pretending otherwise would only waste time neither of us had. His words frightened me, but beneath the fear was something more dangerous, an ache I could not name. For a moment I turned away, staring at the water where sunlight broke into 1,000 pieces. I wanted to believe that distance could protect me, but his presence clung like heat, undeniable, pulling at the edges of my will. He did not touch me, not yet, but the promise of touch lived in the charged air between us, and I felt the question growing. Was I meant to escape him, or was I meant to fall? The uncertainty was its own trap, and I walked into it willingly with every stolen glance. He left without warning, rising as though summoned by something only he could hear, and the absence he left was louder than his presence had been. My book lay unopened on my lap, my heartbeat still unsteady, and I understood that avoidance was no longer possible. Whatever secret he carried had already tied itself to me, invisible yet unbreakable, and the ship itself seemed to conspire in keeping me near him. The voyage had only just begun, and already the sea had chosen sides. That evening the ship transformed. What had been corridors of quiet footsteps and soft murmurs became avenues of light and laughter, chandeliers trembling with brilliance, violins weaving melodies that turned the air into silk. Guests paraded in gowns that shimmered like liquid jewels, men in tailored suits that spoke of fortunes made and inherited, and the ocean itself seemed to hold its breath to admire the spectacle. I told myself I would disappear into the crowd, that in a sea of strangers I could finally vanish. But anonymity has a way of slipping from your grasp when someone has already claimed your name. I moved through the ballroom with a glass in hand, though the champagne sparkled untouched, my eyes stealing glimpses of faces that meant nothing to me, trying to convince myself that his would not appear among them. Yet the air betrayed me, heavy with the certainty that he was near, the way perfume lingers long after the wearer has gone. I hated how instinct made me search for him, hated more the relief that spread through me when I finally caught the unmistakable line of his shoulders in the distance. He was surrounded, of course. Women with practiced smiles leaned closer, their laughter too sharp, their interest sharpened like glass. Men approached him with the stiffness of those who owe respect to someone they secretly envy. And still his posture remained untouched, a gravity that drew every eye without needing to claim it. I thought perhaps he would ignore me, that I could stand in the shadow of his presence without ever being noticed, but his gaze found mine across the glittering room, steady and unshakable, as if I were the only anchor in a night of endless glitter. The music shifted, a swell of strings, and couples drifted to the center of the floor. I turned away quickly, heart pounding in a rhythm that mocked the orchestra, but footsteps followed, deliberate, cutting through the noise without haste. When his hand brushed mine, it was not an accident but a declaration, quiet yet impossible to deny. He asked nothing, demanded nothing, simply waited, and the silence of his patience pressed harder against me than any command could have. I should have refused. I should have stepped back and disappeared into the crowd. But something in his eyes, calm yet carrying storms, pulled the word yes from a place I could not silence. He led me onto the dance floor, and the world rearranged itself. The chandeliers blurring into rivers of light, the violins fading into a pulse that seemed to echo only between us. His hand at my back was steady, not possessive but certain, as though he had been guiding me long before this dance began. Around us, conversations faltered, whispers curling like smoke as recognition passed through the room. They saw me, not as a passenger who happened to stumble into a dance, but as someone chosen by the man who owned the ship. Their stares weighed on me, a mixture of envy and speculation. And in that moment, I understood that his secret was not just mine to fear. It was something the entire ship seemed to sense, though none dared to name it aloud. The air between us thickened, heavy with questions unspoken, yet I found myself clinging to the steadiness of his hand. When the music ended, he did not let go immediately, holding me in the hush that followed as though reluctant to return me to the crowd. His voice brushed against my ear, low and certain, promising that this voyage would change more than the course of my days. I tried to laugh, to dismiss his words as arrogance, but the tremor in my chest betrayed me. For the first time, I wondered if the danger he hinted at was not waiting to arrive but already circling us, hidden behind the glitter of chandeliers and the polite masks of strangers. The ballroom emptied slowly, like a dream dissolving back into reality, laughter fading into the quiet corridors while chandeliers dimmed to a softer glow. I left the music behind, carrying the echo of it in my pulse, and walked alone down the polished hall, the hem of my dress whispering against the carpet. For a moment I thought I had escaped the weight of his gaze, but then I felt something colder, not from him but from the strangers I passed. Their eyes lingered too long, measuring, questioning, and I realized with a shiver that the dance had placed me in a spotlight I had not asked for. Whispers trailed after me, too faint to catch in words, yet heavy with implication. The woman in emerald silk glanced once, twice, her expression flickering between curiosity and disdain. Two men at the corner bar lowered their voices the instant I approached, though their silence spoke louder than any conversation. It was as if by accepting his hand, I had accepted more than a dance, as if I had been marked, claimed by a story they already half knew but refused to share aloud. The ship's luxury no longer felt like safety. It felt like theater, and I had stepped into the script without rehearsal. When I reached the upper deck, the night air wrapped me in salt and wind, sharp against the glow of the ballroom still pulsing faintly below. The ocean stretched endless and indifferent, yet even here, beneath a scatter of stars, I could not shake the sense of being watched. Somewhere behind the railings, shadows shifted. I told myself it was imagination, but instinct clawed at me, whispering that secrecy does not survive long in places designed for spectacle. On this ship, nothing hidden remained hidden. I leaned against the railing, trying to breathe deeply to gather the pieces of myself scattered by the evening. That was when his voice returned, calm, deliberate, too close to be accidental. He said the crowd was already curious, that rumors traveled faster at sea than on land, and that my name would not remain my own for long. I turned, ready to accuse him of orchestrating the entire spectacle, but the steadiness in his eyes stole the accusation from my lips. He seemed less like a man amused by control, and more like one burdened by inevitability. I asked again what secret he carried, what danger he meant when he spoke in riddles. He studied me with a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the waves themselves, then shook his head slightly, as though I was not yet ready for the truth. He told me only that trust was not optional anymore, that circumstances had already bound us together, and that whether I believed him or not, forces beyond this ship were watching. His refusal to explain both frightened and anchored me, leaving me torn between fleeing and clinging closer. Behind us, a door opened with a creak, followed by footsteps too slow, too deliberate. Another passenger, a man I had not noticed before, walked past with a glance that was neither friendly nor indifferent. His eyes caught mine briefly, a flicker sharp enough to chill, and then he was gone, swallowed by the dim hall. The billionaire's jaw tightened, so subtle I almost missed it. And in that fleeting moment I understood. He was not the only one keeping secrets aboard. Others knew more than they should, and some of them were not willing to stay silent. The ship swayed gently, carrying us forward, but beneath the calm surface I felt the swell of something darker, a current invisible but pulling strong. The air between us crackled with tension, not only of attraction but of danger, as though the dance we shared had opened a door that could never be closed. I realized then that this voyage was not only an escape or a chance encounter, it was a stage for a revelation waiting to strike. And every step I took across those gleaming decks drew me closer to a truth that terrified and fascinated me in equal measure. The night wrapped the deck in silver light, the ocean stretching like a mirror that refused to end. I had gone there for solitude, hoping the salt air would quiet the storm he had left inside me. But solitude is fragile, and the moment I felt the air shift, I knew he was there. His footsteps were steady, unhurried, as though the ship itself adjusted its rhythm to carry him toward me. My hands tightened against the railing, my body already aware of his nearness before my mind admitted it. He stopped at my side, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence even against the cool night air. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, as though words might shatter something too delicate to name. The silence grew heavy, not awkward but charged. A tether stretched between us. When I finally turned to look at him, his gaze was already fixed on me. Calm and relentless, the kind of gaze that holds you until you forget how to breathe. His hand moved first, slow, deliberate, brushing against mine where it rested on the railing. The contact was slight, almost accidental, but the jolt it sent through me was not. My pulse stuttered, my chest rising too quickly as if the ship had tilted beneath us. He did not pull away. Instead, his fingers lingered, steady, anchoring me in place. It was a touch that asked nothing yet promised everything, a touch that unraveled the defenses I had so carefully rehearsed. I told myself to step back, to reclaim the space that was slipping between us, but the truth clung to me. I did not want to. The world narrowed to the warmth of his hand, the nearness of his breath, the ocean's hush wrapping us in secrecy. He leaned closer then, just enough for the scent of him, sandalwood and sea air, to surround me, and I felt my knees weaken beneath the weight of what hovered between us. His eyes lowered briefly to my lips, and the sight stole every thought I had left. My heart beat so loudly I was certain he could hear it, certain the whole ship could. He moved closer still, the world shrinking until only inches remained between us, until the ocean itself seemed to pause in anticipation. My breath caught, my body answering a question he had not yet spoken, and for one trembling moment I believed the inevitable had arrived. But at the last instant he stopped. His lips lingered close enough to taste the possibility, yet he withheld it, leaving the space thick with frustration and longing. His voice broke the silence, low and certain, telling me that some things once taken could never be undone. The promise of the kiss remained suspended in the air, sharp and unbearable, and it was that denial that bound me tighter than any fulfillment could have. He stepped back, slow and deliberate, as though he had granted me mercy instead of torment. My body leaned forward instinctively, betraying me, but he did not return. Instead, he left me with the weight of everything unspoken, with the fire of almost that burned hotter than completion, and as the night folded around me, I understood that he had not spared me at all. He had trapped me, ensuring that I would wait for the kiss that had nearly been mine. Sleep did not come easily that night, though the ship rocked with a gentleness that should have carried me into dreams. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the rhythm of the waves echoed against my chest. My lips still tingled from the kiss that had almost happened, from the possibility he had dangled so close, only to steal it away. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the ghost of his breath, the warmth of his hand brushing mine, and the denial was more intoxicating than fulfillment could have been. Morning brought sunlight spilling across the cabin, but it did not wash away the memory. I dressed quickly, eager to distract myself with the distractions of the ship. Breakfast among strangers, quiet hours with a book, the illusion of a life untouched. But even surrounded by chatter and clinking silver, my thoughts bent back to him. The ballroom laughter, the silver glint of his gaze, the way he had stopped just short of claiming me, it replayed endlessly, a scene my heart refused to release. I tried to convince myself it was arrogance, a calculated act designed to keep me restless, and perhaps it was. He was a man who owned not only the ship, but the silence inside it. A man who measured every move as though the world itself answered to his timing. Yet beneath the calculation I had glimpsed something else, something more dangerous, restraint. He had wanted to kiss me. I knew it in the tremor of his breath. But he had chosen not to, and that choice haunted me. Later, as I walked the deck, the sea stretched vast and merciless around me. Tourists laughed at the pool. Children chased each other along the safe railings. And somewhere a piano spilled careless music. I moved through it like a ghost, invisible except for the weight of his gaze that I felt even before I saw him. When our eyes finally met across the crowded space, the air thickened. The chatter dimmed and the world contracted again to a line that tethered only us. He did not come closer immediately. He stood, watching as though content to let the tension grow, as though the memory of last night's almost kiss were enough to speak louder than words. I hated how my body betrayed me, leaning subtly in his direction, my breath unsteady, my pulse betraying every defense I had constructed. And when he finally crossed the distance, slow and deliberate, I felt as though the ocean itself tilted to make room for him. We spoke little. He asked if I had slept, though his eyes already knew the answer. I told him the truth in silence, because my voice would have cracked beneath the weight of it. He smiled faintly, not triumphant but knowing, the kind of smile that makes secrets heavier instead of lighter. His hand brushed mine once more, a gesture small to anyone watching, but to me it was everything. The echo of last night returned, a reminder that the line between almost and inevitable was thinning. As he left, I realized with startling clarity that this was his trap, his careful game, not giving me what I thought I wanted, but making me crave it until it consumed me. And worse, I was already caught. The sea stretched boundless around us, yet I was no longer free. My prison was not the ship, not the voyage, but the promise of a kiss withheld, a promise that had branded me more deeply than any touch ever could. The night returned with a hush that felt heavier than the one before, the kind of quiet that carries secrets rather than peace. I found myself once again on the deck, drawn by the rhythm of the waves and by the memory of his nearness that refused to loosen its grip. The stars stretched endless above, careless and brilliant, and I told myself I had come to breathe, to reclaim the solitude I had lost. But solitude was no longer mine, not since his presence had burned itself into my skin. When he appeared, it was not sudden. He moved like the tide, slow, inevitable, as though the world itself adjusted to his steps. My pulse betrayed me before he spoke, racing with the recognition my mind pretended to deny. He stood beside me, close but not touching, and the silence between us was a living thing, swelling with everything unspoken. The air smelled of salt and something darker, the scent of storm on the horizon, though the sea remained deceptively calm. His words were few, unnecessary. He asked if I trusted him, and the question was more dangerous than any confession. My lips parted, but no sound came, because trust felt like surrender, and yet the thought of denying it left me hollow. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine with the same careful patience as before, and my body answered before my voice could. I turned toward him, pulled not by decision but by gravity itself, and suddenly the space between us was a breath, a heartbeat, a fragile thread about to break. His gaze locked on mine, steady, relentless, and then dipped lower to my lips as though the ocean itself had tilted us toward this moment. My breath faltered, caught between anticipation and fear, but I did not step back. This time there was no hesitation, no second guessing. His hand lifted slowly, fingertips brushing along my jaw with the tenderness of a vow unspoken, and I felt the world fall silent in that suspended instant. The kiss hovered, inevitable, only inches away. But before it could arrive, the sound of footsteps broke the spell, quick, purposeful, echoing against the wooden planks of the deck. I pulled back startled, as a crew member passed hurriedly, his expression tight, his eyes darting between us as though he had intruded on something more dangerous than forbidden romance. The interruption shattered the moment like glass, leaving fragments sharp enough to wound. The man beside me straightened, his composure unbroken, but the storm in his gaze betrayed the frustration of denial once more. I wanted to scream at the universe, to demand the moment returned, but the opportunity had slipped beyond reach, leaving only the ache of almost. He said nothing, only let his hand fall back to his side, the echo of its touch lingering long after it was gone. The silence between us was heavier now, weighted by what had nearly been twice denied. I wondered if fate itself conspired to keep us waiting, stretching the thread until it threatened to snap. He walked with me back toward the corridor, his steps unhurried, his presence steady, but I felt the storm building in the space between us. Every interruption, every delay only made the promise of his lips more unbearable, and I knew the next time the world gave us a chance, he would not let it slip away. The kiss we had been denied twice already was no longer just a possibility. It had become an inevitability waiting to break free. The sea was restless that night, the kind of restlessness that never shows in the calm of the water, but in the way the wind insists on reminding you of its strength. I walked the upper deck, hair tugged loose by the breeze, dress pressing against my legs, and felt as though the ship was sailing through the edge of a dream. Every shadow stretched longer, every sound carried further, and I knew without needing to see that he would find me. He always did. When he appeared, the night seemed to settle around him, the storm bending its rhythm to match his presence. He approached slowly, his steps a quiet promise, and stopped close enough that I felt the heat of him against the chill of the wind. We did not speak at first. Words felt unnecessary, even dangerous, as though naming the moment would break it. His gaze held mine, steady and unflinching, and the ocean roared behind us like an audience waiting for a confession. The silence between us thickened until it became unbearable. I turned slightly, trying to look away, but his hand lifted, catching a strand of my hair the wind had stolen. He tucked it back behind my ear with a tenderness that stole the breath from my chest. The touch was small, delicate, but the meaning behind it carried the weight of something inevitable. My skin burned where his fingers had brushed, and I found myself leaning closer without realizing it. He asked again softly if I trusted him. This time the question felt heavier, like a lock waiting for a key, like the ocean itself would not let me sail further without an answer. My throat tightened, my lips parted, but the word refused to come. Instead, I looked at him, and whatever he saw in my eyes must have been enough, because his expression shifted, not triumphant but certain, as if I had surrendered something without speaking. He stepped closer, the space collapsing until the wind itself seemed trapped between us. His hand moved to my jaw, tracing the line of it as if memorizing me, and I thought of nothing but the gravity pulling us together. My pulse raced, my breath shallow, and when his forehead brushed mine, I felt the universe tilt. The kiss hovered there, waiting, suspended like lightning in a storm, ready to strike at any moment. But once again he withheld. His lips lingered close, the warmth of them brushing mine without claiming, a torment so exquisite it stole my strength. His voice was a whisper against my skin, saying that some moments needed to be earned, not stolen, and that the ocean itself was waiting to decide when ours would arrive. The denial set my body on fire, a frustration sweeter and sharper than fulfillment. When he finally pulled back, the night felt emptier, the wind colder, the stars too far away. I wanted to scream at him, to demand what he refused to give, but the truth was harsher. I did not want it easy, did not want it simple. I wanted the inevitability, the crash of waves that could not be stopped, and in the depth of his gaze I saw the promise that when the kiss came, it would not be a question, it would be an answer. The storm that had threatened all evening finally gave voice to itself, a wind tearing across the deck with a restless urgency, waves striking the hull in hollow percussion. I gripped the railing, my heart racing as the ship shuddered beneath me. But even that power felt distant compared to the storm unraveling inside my chest. He was there again, moving toward me as though summoned, his presence cutting through the chaos like a calm center in the eye of the wind. For a moment I hated him for how steady he seemed, for how certain when everything in me trembled. He reached for me not suddenly, but with the deliberation of a man who knows the world bends when he chooses to touch it. His hand closed over mine where it clutched the railing, steadying me, and that small contact silenced the fear I hadn't wanted to admit. I turned to him, the wind pushing my hair across my face, and he brushed it back with a tenderness that burned more deeply than the storm's cold bite. His fingers lingered, and I felt the question in the gesture, a question I had been running from since the day I boarded. I whispered that I was tired of questions, tired of the game he wove with silence and half-truths. My voice broke against the roar of the sea, but he heard it. I knew he did. His gaze softened, the first crack in his relentless composure, and in that moment the distance between us ceased to exist. His other hand lifted to cradle my jaw, his thumb brushing my cheek in a gesture too intimate to be casual, too final to be withdrawn. The air between us collapsed, leaving no room for escape. When his lips finally found mine, it was not sudden but inevitable, like the tide returning to the shore after holding its breath too long. The kiss was slow at first, almost reverent, as if he were memorizing the taste of something forbidden, but beneath the restraint lay a fire that burned hotter with each second. My body answered before thought could intervene, leaning into him, surrendering to the heat and weight of the moment. It was not a question, not a request, it was a claim, a promise, a storm all its own. The world blurred. The deck, the wind, the ocean's endless roar, all of it receded until there was nothing left but his mouth on mine, the press of his chest against me, the impossible certainty that I had been waiting for this long before I knew his name. I clung to him as though the ship itself was sinking, as though the kiss were the only anchor left in a world, tilted and undone. My heart pounded with a wildness I had never known, a rhythm that belonged entirely to him. When at last he drew back, it was not release but reprieve, his breath still mingling with mine, his forehead resting against me as if unwilling to let the world intrude. His eyes searched mine with an intensity that both terrified and soothed, as though he were asking if I understood the weight of what had just passed. I did not answer with words, because words were too fragile for a moment that had cracked the very structure of my escape. My silence was its own surrender, my gaze a vow I could not take back. He whispered then, his voice low, almost drowned by the sea, that nothing would be the same again, that a single kiss had changed the course of more than just this voyage. And I believed him, not because of the promise in his tone, but because of the certainty in my chest, the knowledge that I had stepped past a line that could never be uncrossed. The storm raged around us, but inside that fragile circle of breath and touch, I knew the greater storm had already begun, and it was ours. When his lips left mine, the world did not return to the way it had been before. The storm still lashed against the ship, the wind still tore at the sky, but none of it mattered as much as the ache he left behind. I touched my lips unconsciously, as though the memory of his kiss had branded me, and no ocean, no horizon could erase it. My chest rose too fast, my body refusing to calm, and in the silence that followed, I felt the shift inside me. Something had been broken or born, and it could not be undone. He did not step away entirely. His hand still lingered at my jaw, his presence too close, too consuming. He watched me with eyes that seemed to know the chaos inside me better than I knew myself. I wanted to ask why he had withheld so long only to claim me now, wanted to demand if this was mercy or manipulation, but my voice betrayed me, trembling with a softness I could not disguise. He did not answer questions I had not asked, only let the quiet bind us tighter. I turned from him, desperate for space, but the deck stretched wide and endless and still felt too small. Every step I took was heavy with the pull of his gaze, the tether that refused to let me go. I told myself it had been a mistake, that it should never have happened, that I would forget it by morning. Yet the truth clung to me. Forgetting was impossible. The kiss lived inside me like fire under skin, impossible to smother. When he finally spoke, his words cut through the storm like a blade. He said I should not fear what had passed, that fear wasted time we did not have, and that the ocean carried more dangers than desire ever could. His voice was steady, but I caught the shadow in it, the hint that he was warning me of more than feelings. I wanted to demand clarity, but the weight in his tone told me that knowledge might be heavier than ignorance. I accused him then, my voice sharper than I intended, telling him he had trapped me with half-truths and stolen moments. His answer was silence at first, a silence that made my chest ache with frustration, and then finally a confession spoken like a wound. He admitted that I had been seen long before this voyage, that my presence on this ship was not an accident, and that my life was already tied to his in ways I had not chosen. My heart lurched, torn between terror and something dangerously close to relief. The storm broke with sudden violence, rain cutting across the deck, scattering guests who had braved the night air. He pulled me toward the shelter of an alcove, his arm firm around me, shielding me from the downpour. The contact was both protection and possession, and I trembled not from the cold, but from the awareness of how wholly I was caught. His nearness consumed every sense, his scent, his heat, the steadiness of his grip. I should have fought it, but I leaned closer instead, as if my body had already surrendered what my mind still resisted. In that fragile moment, pressed between the storm and his strength, I realized the truth I feared most. The kiss had not been the culmination of our story, but the beginning. He had awakened something in me that I could not silence, no matter how much I wanted to. And as his gaze held mine, fierce and unyielding, I knew that whatever secret he carried would not only change this voyage, it would change me. The storm passed, leaving the deck drenched and gleaming beneath the lanterns, but the weight of the night lingered inside me. We had kissed, truly kissed, and yet the questions were louder than the memory. My lips still burned with the taste of him, but my mind clawed for answers he refused to give. I wanted to believe it had been nothing more than desire, nothing more than two souls colliding at sea, but the truth pressed harder. There was design behind his every move, and I was part of it whether I chose to be or not. The following day blurred between reality and recollection. Every corner of the ship seemed to carry his shadow. The grand staircase, the polished dining hall, even the quiet library where I sought refuge. I could not escape him, not because he followed me openly, but because his presence lived beneath my skin. And then he appeared again, as inevitable as the tide, stepping into my solitude with a composure that made the walls themselves seem smaller. His gaze softened when it fell on me, but beneath that softness lay steel. We spoke little at first. He asked if I regretted it, and the question cut deeper than I expected. My silence betrayed me, trembling with an answer I could not say aloud. He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine as though reminding me that words were unnecessary. And then he kissed me again, not with restraint this time, but with the hunger of a man who had denied himself too long. The kiss consumed me, pulling me into a fire I both feared and craved, and when he broke it, my breath came ragged, my body unsteady. I should have pushed him away. I should have demanded the truth before surrendering again, but his nearness unraveled me. He touched my cheek, his thumb tracing slowly as if memorizing the shape of my hesitation. His eyes searched mine as though asking for something I could not name, and I realized that trust was no longer a choice. I had already given it in pieces, through silence, through surrender, through the way my lips answered before my mind could argue. Later, as we walked the corridors, I felt the stares of others, sharper now than before. Their whispers followed us, disguised as politeness, and I understood that what had begun in secrecy was no longer ours alone. He seemed unbothered, his expression controlled, but I saw the flicker in his jaw, the tightening of his hand against mine. He was aware, as I was, that eyes lingered too long, that speculation was building like storm clouds. Whatever secret he carried was no longer invisible. It was bleeding into the air around us. I confronted him again, pressing harder this time. asking why my presence mattered, why he had chosen me. He did not answer directly. Instead, he told me that there were truths that could not be spoken in open halls, that silence was sometimes the only shield against those who would twist what they did not understand. His voice carried both warning and promise, and though it left me restless, it bound me closer to him, because fear had already woven itself into desire. That night, alone in my cabin, I traced my fingers across my lips, haunted by the fire he had set alight. The kiss was no longer curiosity. It had become addiction. Yet beneath the heat pulsed a deeper ache, the knowledge that I was falling for a man whose secrets were heavier than his touch, whose silence spoke louder than his words. And as sleep eluded me, I knew the danger was no longer only outside, it lived inside my chest, beating with every thought of him. The days blurred in a rhythm I could no longer control, each one tethered not to the ticking of clocks, but to the moments when I felt him near. The ocean rolled endlessly beyond the railings. Passengers carried on with laughter and leisure, but for me the voyage had narrowed into something more intimate, a world measured by his steps, his glances, his silences. I told myself I should fight it, that I should cling to the fragments of freedom I had come here to find, but every denial melted the instant his eyes found mine. One evening, the ship hosted another dinner beneath glittering chandeliers, a spectacle of silver trays and crystal glasses. I tried to vanish into the crowd, to disappear among the elegance, but he appeared at my side as though conjured. His hand brushed my arm, guiding me gently yet firmly toward a table apart from the others, and the touch was both command and caress. I resented how easily I obeyed, resented more how much I wanted to. When he leaned close to speak, his breath warm against my ear, I forgot entirely what it was I had meant to resist. He kissed me again there, not caring for the glances that followed. The room seemed to hush just for a moment, as his lips claimed mine with a certainty that silenced every doubt. It was bolder this time, less hesitant, the kind of kiss that announced itself rather than concealed. My body answered with a tremor I could not disguise, my heart hammering loud enough that I swore it filled the silence between violin notes. When he pulled back, whispers rippled across the tables, but his hand remained steady at mine, daring the world to speak. Later on the deck beneath the stars, his touch was gentler, almost reverent, as if balancing the boldness of before. He traced the line of my jaw, brushed hair from my face, and kissed me again with a slowness that threatened to undo me completely. It was not hunger this time, but devotion, a tenderness that frightened me more than fire. I felt my defenses slip, brick by brick, until all that remained was the truth I had not wanted to admit. I wanted him, not only despite the secrets, but because of them. Still the unease lingered. Every whisper from the other passengers, every lingering glance reminded me that I was not only falling for him, I was falling into something larger, something dangerous. I asked again for answers, for the truth he kept locked behind those storm-dark eyes, and once more he refused, but with a softness that felt more like sorrow than arrogance. He told me only that some truths carried weight enough to sink ships, and that when mine came I would not face it alone. His refusal should have driven me away, but instead it tied me tighter. I leaned into him, kissed him again, my fingers clutching his jacket as though to anchor myself. He answered with a fire that erased the cold air, with a hunger that made the rest of the world dissolve. And in that moment I stopped asking questions. The kiss was its own answer, an admission we were both too afraid to voice in words. When he finally let me go, I felt both steadier and more broken than before. The night carried us forward, the sea whispering promises I could not trust. But one truth had rooted itself inside me. Whatever secret he carried, I was already entangled beyond escape. The voyage was no longer about distance from my past. It had become the current pulling me toward a future I could neither predict nor resist. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of stolen moments and lingering touches. I told myself I should resist, that I should guard the fragments of freedom I still clung to, but the truth grew harder to ignore. Every time he entered a room, every time his hand brushed mine, the air shifted, bending toward him as though even the ship itself obeyed his gravity. The line between avoidance and surrender had grown too thin to see. That night, the ballroom glittered again with music and light, but I barely noticed the chandeliers or the laughter. My attention was fixed only on him, On the way, his presence drew the stares of everyone around us, yet made me feel as though we were alone. When he asked me to dance, I did not hesitate. His hand settled at my waist, firm and steady, and the world shrank until all I could hear was the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the music. As we moved across the floor, I forgot to resist. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking, unwavering, and in them I saw not only desire but something deeper, something that unsettled me with its certainty. His lips brushed my temple briefly, a touch disguised as accident, and my breath caught. I wanted to be angry, wanted to demand why he could not simply explain the shadows that clung to him, but anger dissolved into longing too easily when his touch lingered. Later, beneath the stars, he pulled me close once more. His kiss was no longer restrained. It was hungry, consuming, a fire that demanded an answer from every part of me. My hands clutched his shoulders, my body leaning into his as if I had always been meant to fall there. I told myself I should push away, but my lips answered with a fervor I could not disguise, and in that surrender I felt both freed and captured. He whispered against my mouth that some things were safer left unspoken, and though I wanted to scream for clarity, I found myself clinging to the comfort of his arms instead. The contradiction tore at me. I wanted truth, but I also wanted this, him, his warmth, his certainty. Desire dulled the sharp edges of fear, at least for a moment, and I let myself sink into the illusion of safety he offered. Still, when I returned to my cabin alone, unease curled around me like smoke. I replayed every look, every word, every hesitation in his eyes, and I knew the fire between us was not separate from the danger he hinted at. The passion that burned brighter each night was tangled with shadows I did not understand. I feared that when the truth finally came, it would tear apart not only the voyage, but the fragile bond holding us together. I fell asleep with the memory of his kiss still burning on my lips, the taste of him lingering like salt from the sea. Yet beneath the sweetness lay a question I could not silence. Was I falling for a man who sought to protect me, or for a man who had trapped me in a story I did not choose? The answer lay hidden in his silence, waiting, and I knew the revelation would come sooner than I was ready for. The next day carried a strange stillness, as though the ocean itself was holding its breath. We walked together along the quieter deck, away from the laughter of guests, and for once his composure seemed less impenetrable. His hand brushed mine often, lingering longer each time, but there was a weight in his eyes I had not seen before. It was not the calm of a man in control. It was the gravity of someone carrying too much. I wondered if desire had finally weakened his guard, if the fire between us had loosened the chains of his silence. When we stopped at the railing, the sea stretched endless and merciless before us. I turned to him and asked again for truth, my voice steadier now, sharpened by the courage his closeness gave me. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the horizon as though searching for permission there. Then finally he spoke, not the whole story, not the confession I longed for, but a fragment. He admitted that my cabin had not been chosen by mistake. My name had been marked, placed deliberately long before the voyage began. The admission struck me harder than a scream. I felt the world tilt, though the ship sailed steady. I asked why, desperate, but he shook his head, saying only that there were forces aboard who would twist the truth if they heard it too soon. He told me silence was still my shield, and that for now trust in him was not optional but necessary. His words tangled around me like ropes, comfort and confinement woven into one. He reached for my hand, holding it with a quiet intensity that burned hotter than fire. His thumb traced my palm, steady, grounding, as though the gesture itself was a vow. I hated how much it soothed me, how much I wanted to believe him despite the shadows he refused to name. I leaned into his touch without meaning to, and he bent to kiss me again, slow and consuming, as though sealing the words he would not speak. That kiss was different. It was not only hunger but confession, a truth hidden in lips that would not reveal it aloud. I felt myself unraveling, my heart torn between the fire of passion and the chill of unanswered questions. My body surrendered, even as my mind screamed for clarity, and in that conflict I realized I was no longer free. Desire had already bound me tighter than the silence ever could. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, his breath uneven though his voice remained steady. He whispered that danger was closer than I thought, that whispers already circled the ship, and that soon I would have to choose whether to run or stay. His tone carried sorrow, as though he feared the choice more than I did. I clung to him, terrified not of danger but of distance, and in that embrace I felt the terrifying power of wanting what might destroy me. That night, alone in my cabin, I replayed his words over and over. My cabin had been chosen. My presence was no accident. The revelation left me shaken, yet instead of pushing me away, it tied me tighter. I fell asleep with the echo of his kiss still burning, and with the fear that the next secret he revealed would change not only the voyage, but the very story of who I thought I was. The following day, the ship glittered with its usual performance of leisure. Champagne glasses ringing, laughter spilling through polished halls, music curling through chandeliers. Yet, beneath the glamour, I felt a shift. Whispers followed me. Where I walked, not loud enough to form words, but sharp enough to cut. Faces I did not know lingered too long, eyes holding a weight that sent chills along my skin. It was no longer only his secret I feared, it was the knowledge that others carried pieces of it too. At breakfast, a woman in pearls watched me across the dining room, her gaze steady, unreadable. When I looked back, she did not turn away. Instead, she smiled, the kind of smile that hides more than it shows, and then leaned close to whisper something to the man beside her. He glanced at me once, then lowered his eyes as though my presence were dangerous to acknowledge. I felt the room tighten around me, every glance sharper, every silence heavier. When I left, I found him waiting in the corridor, his posture as calm as ever, but his jaw set in the way I had learned to recognize as warning. He asked if I had noticed, though he already knew the answer. I demanded to know why, demanded to understand what story the others thought they knew. His hand brushed mine, grounding me, but his words were as elusive as ever. He said the ship carried more than passengers, that it carried truths disguised as gossip, and that some eyes saw too much. The afternoon stretched heavy, every corner of the ship charged with suspicion. I caught fragments of conversations cut short when I passed, glances exchanged too quickly, and I began to realize I was not invisible here. I was central, though I had never asked to be. I wanted to retreat, to hide in my cabin, but the walls there carried his shadow, and solitude no longer promised safety. Everywhere I went, the weight of unseen knowledge pressed closer. That evening, he found me again on the deck, the sky bruised with sunset. His presence steadied me, yet it also sharpened my fear. I asked him once more to tell me the truth, to give me even a fragment I could hold. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my skin, a gesture both tender and evasive. He whispered that soon I would know everything, but that until then silence was the only protection he could give. The answer burned with frustration. I wanted to pull away, to fight the chain of half-truths he wrapped around me, but his closeness held me captive. His kiss had left me vulnerable, his touch had made me complicit, and now the shadows of others' gazes bound me tighter still. The danger was no longer distant. It was alive, circling, watching. My fear sharpened, but so did my need for him, a contradiction that left me restless and aching. That night, alone, I replayed every glance, every whisper, every shadow that had followed me. The ship was no longer a vessel of leisure. It had become a stage where secrets played out in silences and half-smiles, and in the center of it I stood without a script, bound to a man who carried both the answers and the danger. Sleep eluded. Me stolen by the knowledge that whatever truth he held, I was no longer the only one searching for it. The following evening, the air on the ship carried a weight that had nothing to do with weather. The corridors were too quiet, the laughter forced, the glances sharper than before. I wandered past the grand lounge, its golden lights spilling warmth, and paused when I caught sight of a small group gathered near the corner. Their voices were low, urgent, not the easy hum of passengers sharing gossip, but the clipped tones of people hiding truth. My name slipped through the air, hushed but unmistakable, and the sound froze me where I stood. I pressed back against the wall, hidden in shadow, straining to catch more. A man with silver hair leaned forward, his words tense, asking if she had already realized. Another replied that she was close, too close, and that if he did not control it, everything would unravel. I didn't need clarity to know they spoke of me and of him. My chest tightened as though the air itself had betrayed me, and I fled before I could hear more, my footsteps loud in my own ears. When I reached the deck, he was there, as though he had known where I would run. His gaze locked on mine instantly, sharp and unyielding, and for once I could not hold it. I told him what I had heard, demanded the truth, the explanations he had denied me for too long. For a moment I saw his mask falter, the steel of his composure cracking under the weight of something heavier than even desire. He reached for me, but I stepped back, my heart pounding too loud to allow comfort. His voice was low, urgent, almost desperate as he told me not to listen to fragments, not to piece together stories from whispers meant to wound. He said the ship carried more enemies than allies, that the truth was tangled in shadows, and that if I forced it now, it would cost us both. I wanted to believe him, but the memory of their words echoed too loudly. She is close, too close. I was not only part of his secret, I was the key to it. The night wind whipped around us, carrying the salt of the sea, and still I trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of uncertainty. I told him I could not live in silence, not when every glance threatened to unravel me. He stepped closer then, his hand at my waist, his eyes fierce. His lips claimed mine in a kiss, sharp with urgency, as though he could silence both my doubts and the storm outside with fire alone. I answered with equal desperation, needing him as much as I feared him. When the kiss broke, my breath was ragged, my resolve weaker. He whispered that the time was near, that the truth would come, but that once it did, I could never return to the life I had known. His words shook me more than the confession I had begged for, because they carried the weight of finality. This was no longer a romance spun in secrecy. It was a tide pulling me toward a revelation that would not be kind. Alone in my cabin, I replayed the whispers, the kiss, the warnings. My heart was tangled in fire, my mind in shadows, and I could no longer separate the two. I had thought the voyage would be escape, freedom, but now I understood it had become something else entirely. I was caught in a story larger than myself, bound to a man who held both my desire and my undoing. And as the waves struck the ship with relentless force, I knew the storm ahead had only begun. The night after the whispers carried a heat of its own, one that had nothing to do with the weather. I found him waiting in the corridor outside my cabin, his presence steady, his expression unreadable. For a heartbeat I considered turning away, locking the door and pretending the fire between us could be smothered. But the truth was merciless. I did not want escape. I wanted him, even if he was the very danger I feared. He reached for me without hesitation this time, his hand at the curve of my neck, pulling me into him as though the world had already decided we belonged there. His lips found mine in a kiss that consumed the silence, urgent and searing, leaving no space for questions. My fingers clutched at his jacket, my body answering with a desperation I could not disguise. Every thought dissolved beneath the weight of his mouth, the certainty that we had crossed into a place there was no return from. We stumbled together into the shadows of an alcove, hidden from the wandering eyes of other passengers. His arms wrapped around me with a fierceness that felt both protective and possessive, as though he feared the world would tear me away if he loosened his hold. The kiss deepened, slower now, lingering, a vow unspoken yet undeniable. I had kissed him before, but never like this, not with the awareness that desire and danger had become one and the same. When he finally pulled back, his forehead pressed to mine, his breath ragged, his voice a whisper, he said that some storms could not be outrun, that once they broke, the only choice was to face them together. His words trembled with more honesty than anything he had spoken before, and though it terrified me, it also steadied me. I realized then that whatever waited at the end of this voyage, I could no longer face it without him. We kissed again, slower this time, the kind of kiss that melted fear into fire. His hand traced the line of my jaw down to my shoulder, grounding me in the present even as shadows pressed closer. The world outside that alcove ceased to matter. For one fragile moment, there was no conspiracy, no secret, only the taste of his mouth, the certainty of his embrace, the knowledge that my heart had already chosen. Yet when footsteps echoed nearby, he tensed, his grip tightening, his eyes scanning the corridor with sharp alertness. He pulled me closer, shielding me with his body, and I realized again that this was not only passion, it was war. Every kiss we stole was a defiance, every touch a risk. The fire between us was undeniable, but it burned in the center of a storm that threatened to consume us both. That night, alone in my cabin, I lay trembling with the memory of his mouth, his hands, his words. I wanted more, I needed more, but beneath the ache lived a fear I could not silence. Tomorrow, I knew, the shadows would no longer whisper. Tomorrow the truth would come, and when it did, no kiss, no embrace would be strong enough to keep the world from breaking open. The morning rose with a heaviness that even sunlight could not lift. Whispers spread like smoke through the corridors. Glances followed me sharper than blades, and I felt the inevitability closing in. He found me on the upper deck, the sea wild beneath a restless sky, his face set with the weight of truth. I knew before he spoke that the moment I had dreaded and longed for in equal measure had finally come. The time for silence had ended. He told me then, my name had not been chosen by chance, nor my cabin by error. I was connected to a legacy written long before I boarded this ship, a legacy entwined with his own. The fortune, the empire, even the ship itself had been tied to my family in ways buried by history. My arrival had awakened whispers that feared what my presence meant. A claim, a right, a bond that made me far more than a guest. My knees weakened, the deck swaying beneath truths heavier than the sea itself. I wanted to scream, to deny, to flee from the destiny he placed before me. But his eyes, steady, burning, relentless, held me fast. He admitted that he had fought to keep me from it, that he had tried to shield me with silence, but that the storm now circling us left no more room for secrets. He told me the truth not as a weapon but as a plea, to trust him, to face the tide together. His voice cracked at the edges, and for the first time I saw the man beneath the mask. Tears blurred the horizon as I stepped toward him, trembling between fury and love. I accused him of stealing my choice, of binding me in chains I had not asked for. But even as I spoke, my body betrayed me, leaning into him, seeking the fire that had already claimed me. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch steady despite the storm in his gaze, and whispered that I had never been trapped. I had been chosen, not by design, but by him. When he kissed me then, it was no longer a secret, no longer an almost. It was fire and confession, vow and surrender, a kiss that sealed not only desire but destiny. My heart thundered against his chest, my hands clutching him as though the sea itself would tear us apart if I let go. Every whisper, every fear, every unanswered question dissolved in the taste of his lips, leaving only the truth that I could not deny. I was his, and he was mine, and nothing could unmake it. The storm broke around us, rain slashing across the deck, thunder rolling in fierce applause. Passengers scattered, but we stood unmoved, bound in an embrace that belonged to no one else. The ocean roared as though it bore witness, as though it had carried us to this very point, demanding we choose not silence, not fear, but fire. And in his arms, beneath the fury of sea and sky, I chose him. That night, as the ship pressed forward into calmer waters, I lay awake with his warmth beside me, the memory of the storm still alive in my chest. The voyage was no longer escape, no longer exile. It had become the beginning of something larger, something both terrifying and extraordinary. Whatever waited beyond the horizon, I knew I would face it with him. And as I closed my eyes, his last kiss lingered like a vow, binding me to a future I had never sought but could no longer live without. If this story touched you, don't leave without subscribing. Your support means everything. Hit the bell so you never miss the next luxury romance. And tell me in the comments, from which country are you watching tonight? I can't wait to know.